I've been talking to Nicola all week, and that's been a big treat.
And there's nothing left to say, right?
No,
nothing.
there's nothing to say.
No.
But at the same time, this is rather a tough spot to put Nicola in, because sadly her father died young. She was just after her 9th birthday.
No, yes. Yeah, the last time I saw, is this on? It doesn't feel on.
Yeah,
It is?
on.
Okay. All right. Yeah, the last time I saw my father, I was 8, and people always come to me and they want to know what he thought of the Jewish question or the state of the world or about politics or all of that stuff, and I know nothing about it. As I said yesterday, the one direct question I asked him, and I remember, is who's the most beautiful woman in the world? And he told me Hedy Lamarr. So there you have it. Yeah, and he never made a movie with her. Shame.
I mean, I was just looking things up, and I discovered that quite apart from your father, you had an early, probably non-memory, which
You're right.
I've never met anyone before who was sunk by a U-boat.
Yes, me.
Yes.
Yes, right.
Just tell us. I mean, I know you don't really remember, but that one. But
No, I really don't remember. I was 10 months old, so I don't remember at all, but it was my most famous moment. My father was making Ninotchka, I believe, at the time, and my mother is English, and she took us to England after I was christened. You have to understand, in Hollywood, all half-Jewish children were Episcopalian. So I was christened, and then my mother took me to England to meet her family. And when we were over there, all the rumblings of war started. And there were all these telegrams between my grandfather and my father saying, get her home, no, there's not going to be any war, blah, blah, blah. And finally, my mother was moved to get me out of England, and my nanny was German. My mother was an English citizen, and by the time they did something about it, there was only one passage left on the Athenia, and so they figured they should send Schwesterlina home with me because they had brought her over there and because she was German. And so we left from Glasgow, I believe, the only time I've been to Scotland. Right, and the first night out, the boat was sunk, and it was at dinner time, and so a lot of the mothers were in the dining room, and the children were left alone in the cabins. And Schwesterlina, because she was my nanny and German and responsible, didn't leave me. So this is a complete dissolve, but just this year, a man who inherited her papers contacted me. Can you imagine? I mean, after all these years, contacted me, said he had been left her account of what happened, and it was absolutely extraordinary. As she was there and the boat was struck, she started to try and get out, and the doors automatically closed in the cabin as a security measure, I guess, to prevent it from filling with water. But what that meant is you couldn't get out. So she got to the door just in time, and as the door started to close automatically, she pushed us out and was injured doing that, but managed to get me out just before it closed. And then she said this horrific scene after of mothers running back to get their children out of the rooms, but the doors had closed and they couldn't do it. And this is something that nobody's ever known. And I mean, come to light until now. I had read about it and read things about the Athenia. So what happened is, she then saved my life. And we got in a boat, and she was carrying me, and by the time then we were picked up. Do you really want to hear this long story?
yes.
So, as you can imagine, so Daddy was in Hollywood, and my mother had been in Scotland staying with somebody and thinking that we were safe, and the headline said, Athenia sunk, no survivors. So there's stories of people who were with my father in Hollywood and said the only time they never saw him smile was during this time waiting for some kind of news. And Mommy went down to the embassy on the first day of the war, and Kennedy was the ambassador. And he had working for him Jimmy Roosevelt, who was Roosevelt's son, who had worked for Daddy on a movie because he wanted to be in movies. So they cleared out the whole, Mommy, you have to have known my mother, that she never took no for an answer, and she just walked through the whole embassy and got to Kennedy's outer office, where they sat her down, and then they told her, really, don't stay here. We promise you, we will bring you all news as we get it. And he was wonderful to her. And then she also contacted Lord Beaverbrook, who I guess was the head of the all the newspapers, yes, or something. And he said that he would send people down to look for me. And what happened in the meantime, God, this is really a long story. I wasn't expecting this. So we were picked up by a Swedish boat that belonged, I guess, to the richest man in Sweden, Alex Wennergren. And Sweden were neutral in the war. So he didn't want it known that he had picked us up. So still there was no news. And then eventually we were transferred to a Canadian boat called the City of Flynn. And at that point, survivors were starting to land and people were starting to land, and news came that we were on this boat. And Lord Beaverbrook had reporters down there who found it. And we ended up in Canada, and Daddy sent my godmother to pick me up. All my lovely baby clothes and pearls and, you know, all those little things that you had from christening presents, of course, gone. I was dressed in sailor's clothes and eating clam chowder, I'm told, which I do not like. And so dissolve, Schwester Lena and we go to LA, and she takes over the nursery. After all, she saved my life. So my mother returns, having bunked with Merle Oberon. They couldn't to get out of England together. And from Jared's Cross is where they were staying. And when Mummy wanted to see me, Schwester Lena wouldn't let her in the nursery. She wanted Mummy to make an appointment, because now I was her child. So when Mummy came finally once without an appointment to the nursery, and Schwester Lena hauled off and hit her. So my mother had a complete breakdown, and the doctor said to my father, okay, you have a choice. It's your wife or your nurse. And you have to make a choice. But can you imagine? I mean, my father was quite well known at that time, and there had been a lot of press about how Schwester Lena had saved my life, and then Lubitsch fires the nanny who saved his daughter's life is not really good copy. So he said, all right, what would you like? And she said she would like a candy store. So he bought her a candy store, and she left. And she must have gotten rid of it quite soon, and then she went to work for John Payne, whose daughter came to me at a Lubitsch retrospective lately and said, I've come here because all my life I wanted to know. John Payne, I don't know if you know the actor, and Anne Shirley, well, this was their daughter. And so I've never understood, nobody would tell me, why did your father fire Schwester Lena, who saved your life? So it's a round circle. So that's my moment of fame.
So that's the first 10 months.
That's the first 10 months, right.
I mean,
hard to go follow that, right?
It's very hard to follow that. but I mean, what memories are strongest of your father? I mean, he must have been busy all the time. He can't have had much much time for you.
No, he was busy all the time. First of all, my parents split up when I was 4. So I spent all the vacations with my mother. And I'm sorry, the reverse. I spent all the school year with my mother and all the vacations with my father. And when you go to private school in America, that's a lot of vacation. So it all came to about 6 months with each, almost.
Oh, I see. So you really did see quite a lot of him.
I saw a lot of him.
Obviously working.
He was working, yeah. So what do I remember?
Yes. Was he fun as a father?
No, he wasn't. You know, everybody asked me, and was he funny? He wasn't funny.
No.
He was tender, and he was intimate, and he was dear. You know, I didn't realize that at the time, but he always had time for me, and he was always interested in what I did. He would come home from the studio, and I would sit with him while he had his coffee and cookies, and he would listen to all my problems with my doll and my horse and my friends and my governess who made me do stuff I didn't want to do, and he was always extremely sympathetic. And we would listen to quiz shows and, you know, play along with them.
Well, your mother was English.
My mother was English, yes.
How did they meet?
They met at a party, and then...
was she working in Hollywood?
Oh, that's a long story.
That's what
She's English. She was English, and she was English and very beautiful, and went to the London School of Economics, and yeah. And they did Shakespeare in Modern Dress, and they toured it in Scandinavia. And because my mother knew nothing at all about theater, but because she was very beautiful, they cast her as Desdemona, and they went traveling with this. And then there was a woman called Patricia Nathan, whose grandfather, Lord Dettering, had been, I don't know, her family had been she'd grown up in China, and she wanted to be an actress, and her grandfather was the only white man at court and advisor to the Dowager Empress. I mean, really, this could go on. My mother wrote a whole book on it, but my mother, out of Patricia Nathan, she changed her name to Sari Maritza, and decided she would be a Hungarian film star. And my mother's name was Sonia Besançonnet. Nobody could pronounce it, so she changed her name to Vivian Gay. And together they got a contract to go to Hollywood. You know, and then Auntie Pat lost her accent, her Hungarian accent quickly. But it's a really long, long story. And she married a man called Sam Katz, who was the head of Paramount. And Mummy became a literary agent, and nobody could get in to see my father. And he had met her at a party and say, we should go out, or something like that. And she wasn't interested. She had been engaged to Randall Scott. This is really convoluted, right? But Randall Scott's mother wanted him to marry Mariana DuPont. So out with my mother. So she said, okay, I'll go to Lubitsch, and they wanted to sell him this story for Trouble in Paradise. And she said, I'll get into his office, and of course she did. And they got married. That was the story. That's how they met.
A couple of days ago, I suddenly saw the name Lubitsch written in Cyrillic. I thought, this is a Russian name. I mean, and it's absolutely a Russian name, Lubitsch.
Really?
Yeah.
I never heard that.
No. I mean, it translates very well into it sounds perfectly
Does it?
German, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds perfectly German, but it's not. It's Lubitsch.
Huh.
And they had come from Russia, hadn't they?
Well, I always heard he came from Vilna, but I'm reading that he didn't. But my cousin, my father, the generations were off because my father had 3 older siblings, and there was a 20-year age difference between his brother and him. And he was incredibly spoiled. His father was very choleric, had no use for his other children, but my father could do no wrong. And my father, when he went to the gym, or went to school, his oldest sister would go with him and take his shoes off and change into his gym shoes. I mean, my father could do nothing. He couldn't drive a car. He couldn't run his bath. He could barely dress himself. I'm not kidding. You really think I'm making this up? And, you know, if he hadn't been so successful, I think he would have been a very unhappy person because he couldn't do anything. And he wanted to be, you know, he didn't like reading. Nobody ever saw him reading anything except for Napoleon. He read this book about Napoleon, and that's it. And when he wanted his library furnished, you know, in Los Angeles, he just told his secretary, "Go and buy me lots of books," which she did. So, yeah, and the other interesting thing really about my father is he had no interest in things, none. I mean, you look at his movies, the costumes, the textures, the beautiful things, no interest. He didn't buy his clothes, he didn't buy his car, he didn't care about them in his personal life. It was all in his head and his imagination. And, you know, when my mother moved in, the bedroom looked like something out of a Lubitsch movie, satin and dark purple and everything, and she got rid of all of it. She said, no, 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 this can't be, you know, and made it light and full of flowers and perfume bottles and stuff like that. So I think that's really interesting, you know, that wasn't his thing. It was music and friends, and he loved to eat. He was always on a diet, but he ate the same thing all the time. Prunes for breakfast, and he would walk downstairs with a radio, listening to the Fred Waring Show. I have no idea what the Fred Waring Show is. Some kind of breakfast show, I guess. And the same thing in, somebody remembers the Fred Waring Show? He was what? He was a band leader. He invented the blender. No, really?
The Waring blender.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah, and he had, we had the same thing for lunch every single day. Cold cuts, you know, liverwurst and salami and bologna and dark bread. And at Christmas we had a Baumkuchen in the hall, and my father would dress up as Santa Claus. And we had a Christmas tree and a big Christmas party. I don't think I'm really telling you much of anything.
You're astonishing us. You are astonishing us, because this is a wonderful, vivid picture of somebody we really did not know. I mean, from biographies and films and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, he was, I'm just trying to think, you know, I feel so sad that I don't have him with me, and I feel sad that I don't have more memories, and that, you know, I'm sure most of you have had your father or your mother or whatever most of your lives, and when I have friends who have famous parents and everything, like the Weilers, they had their father for so long, you know, and I feel so sad that I didn't take advantage of Billy Wilder, or I felt kind of ashamed that I didn't know my father, so I didn't want to ask. Isn't that kind of silly, isn't it?
But what child really knows? No child asks their parent these questions and then once they're gone.
Right, but even as I got older, when I was with Billy or Walter Reich or any of those, I never really asked.
How long did your mother live?
My mother lived till she was 102, but my mother had the most incredible imagination. I mean, she just invented, so I never knew if she was telling me the truth or not. Seriously, that's no joke. So years later, when this whole thing with the Athenia and with what my mother told me, and somebody validated it, I thought, oh my God, she was really telling me the truth. My mother was a force of nature. As we say, she had a whim of iron. Yeah.
So in fact, it's not so long since she died.
She died when I went to the Locarno Film Festival. So if anybody knows, they did a retrospective of my father, Freedom, and did we not meet? No, that was San Sebastian. Sorry. Anyway, so it was maybe about 8 years ago, not even. Yeah, she was 102. And if anybody says to me, you have good genes, don't. I don't want to live to 102. My father was only 56.
Yes.
Yeah.
But your mother stayed and you stayed in a sense within a Hollywood milieu because you don't.
No, not at all.
No, so
my mother had no interest in film. Well, Tally Weiler, Willie's wife, was a great friend of my mother's. She was the only Hollywood person, the Waxmans and the Weilers. And so, in fact, Willie and Tally came to my house in Los Angeles, I mean, as an adult, so they stayed friends. But that's really about it. And the Coners, and yeah, the Waxmans, Johnny Waxman. Have you ever? No. Had him, yeah. Well, Johnny Waxman, no, well, that's got nothing to do with anything.
So let's have it.
But, no, Johnny Waxman came to see me in Paris. I mean, our mothers, this is Franz Waxman's son. And he was younger and a pest, and our mothers were close friends, so he was always left with me, and he came to Paris, and I put a nightgown on him and locked him on the balcony of the hotel room and went away. And he's still speaking to me all these years later.
I don't know what to ask after that.
This is going to suddenly sound really serious. Earlier in the day at the Collegium, we were talking about John Stahl and the films that we've been seeing, and people were talking about the parallels between Stahl and your father's work. But one of the things that, in terms of the particularly how strong his women are, but there was also a discussion that in the films of Lubitsch, there's an element of cynicism that's always there, that is really not there in Stahl. And I'm wondering, where do you think that cynical streak comes from? Is that something that's is it stereotyped to say that it's very
Cynical,
German,
I guess that I don't really see it that way. I still see him as his child, so I don't see the cynical. I should see it. You have to point it out to me. Do you mean in relationships?
In things like The Marriage Circle. That was
I haven't seen The Marriage Circle.
Okay, that was one of the films that was particularly mentioned in that way. But I think there's an edge in a way, jaded perhaps. What do you think, David? What would you?
No,
Worldly.
I don't know. I kind of feel if you start your life as a Jewish emigre from Imperial Russia,
But I don't.
You keep it sort of,
I don't think he started his life that way. I don't think he felt that way.
No, probably
At all. I mean, he
not
wasn't.
feeling it, but still, you know. That's,
Do you think? I mean, he grew. I think that he was always came from a prosperous family. They had a tailoring concern. Yes. I don't think if you're Jewish like he was, everybody was Jewish. I mean, you don't really think about it. Do you think? I mean, I think people put more. Obviously, he picked that persona to make his films because it was what he knew, but I don't think it went with him. He didn't come to Hollywood as a Jewish person. He came as a director that was wanted. Mary Pickford didn't bring him because he was Jewish. He wasn't fleeing, you know?
No, but...
I mean, Billy Wilder might have had that edge because he was escaping.
Yeah.
It's a totally different thing.
Your father came much earlier. So.
Daddy came earlier, and you know, I think it's something I always thought growing up, which is beginning to be proven wrong, that he wasn't political because he wasn't. I had friends who had been blacklisted, and I mean, whose parents had been blacklisted, or who had been very involved in political movements, and Daddy wasn't at all. He gave money and was part of the relief fund, the German or the European relief fund with Paul Kohner. But he wasn't involved in the day-to-day workings of it like Paul was. I mean, he just gave his name and his money. But I don't think that's something that's really come maybe in this year, that I've realized what he was saying and how much he felt it. And I'm getting way off the topic of what you were saying, aren't you? I've gone in a different direction. But
Just as well.
no, I don't know. I just don't. I'm sure there are people in this audience who know about my father much more than I know. But I've never felt he was escaping anything. I do know that I've had very mixed feelings about Germany and about giving things to the Film Museum in Berlin, because I know that my father never wanted to go back to Germany, and I've had very strong feelings about it, wouldn't let German be spoken in the house. And we had a house full of German employees, and my mother spoke perfect German. And I don't know where I was going with that, but so I've had mixed feelings. Now I absolutely love Germany, and I feel that Berlin is a second home, and I go there with pleasure twice a year. And I don't know where in the world I was going with this.
Just talking,
blah, blah.
No, it wasn't, because we were talking about whether you thought your father was political.
Yeah, so but I've seen his films, Ninotchka. I heard actually that it was played, I've heard this for years, that it was played a lot in Italy during the elections, where there was a strong communist element, effectively. I don't know whether that's true or not true. Zubin Mehta told me that To Be or Not to Be was played a lot in Israel. So I don't know, and I know when I was in Paris, it's been played there a lot for political reasons, I think. And those films, obviously, the two of his most famous, are wildly political and way ahead of their time. And I know that To Be or Not to Be, I know my mother told me the story that my father was not good at criticism, because he was very lucky that most of his films were a big success. But To Be or Not to Be was not, and he was wildly criticized for that movie when it came out. And with the sin of all sins, that it had bad taste. It was a lack of taste. And my mother couldn't find my father. He read the review or something and took off, and she couldn't find him. And she found him in his bed in a dark room, groaning, with his hand up in the air and just groaning and groaning. He had taken it very, very badly, the criticism. He didn't understand, because to him the cardinal sin was a lack of bad taste. Just think what he would have made of Mr. Trump.
The poor man didn't have much experience of bad reviews, did he?
No, he didn't. He didn't.
It must have come as quite a shock.
Well, I think in something he obviously felt very personally, and, the timing was bad, I guess, for it. It didn't war break out or something happened during the film. Or not war broke, something happened right during, I can't remember. What? Oh, I know that. But this is politically something happened. When I introduced it in Los Angeles, I knew it, but I forgot. I have to call, text Joe and find out.
It's a problem keeping, because he made such an incredible number of films, isn't he? It's a huge filmography.
Really?
Yes.
I don't think so. Rather slender, isn't it?
I can't remember.
He made a lot of German films.
Yeah, exactly.
German films. And a lot of titles. I think he comes to something like 160 titles.
Oh, I don't think so.
I think so, but don't quote me. But
I thought something like 70, no?
Well, I think when you take the early ones and the ones that he acted in, probably.
Yeah, that's so funny, seeing him acting, because I look at him, it's not like being Cary Grant's child, so...
by a Bob Dylan, yeah.
Yeah, so I look at him and I think, God, which of my daughters looks like him, and do we have anything of his? And it's just so, it's hard to identify
we've had W.C. Fields' granddaughter here,
Yeah.
Harriet Fields, and I imagine she feels the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a very large mouth. He had a very large mouth. And my party trick is I can get my whole hand in my mouth, but I'm not going to do it now.
No, but the character Maya, yeah, it's a sort of funny face, but it's still a nice face. It's, you know.
Yeah. But I meant I don't see him that much, right? It's not that often. So if Di Pupa or whatever he's in just for a short time, it's trying to look at this person, you know, and just see what we have of him.
Yes, yes. Oh, the opening.
My mother tells me my hands and my mouth, and the top of my head is flat.
Shall we open it up to
Yeah,
questions from the audience? Where's the microphone?
I know you're dealing with memories of a child, but as an adult, when you look at his films, is there any moment in the film that you could point to that you think really captures your father's personality?
His personality. I would think, it's not a question I was expecting, and his personality I would think would probably be more in the German film. So I would imagine Ich möchte kein Mann sein, that kind of impish, defiant, I'm going to be my own person, do my own thing, live my own, be the author of my own life. That's, I would think, that is very much him.
And that energy as well.
Yeah.
Every time you go back to that is really a remarkable film.
It's a remarkable film. It's a remarkable film, yeah.
I think that's two questions. One, do you know much or anything about directors he admired?
I'm sorry?
Do you know anything about directors he admired? And
No, I don't.
And then my second question was, if he wasn't political, why did he refuse to have Herman spoken?
Well, because there was a very strong anti-German sentiment, as you can imagine, in Hollywood. And there was a famous story that I guess Daddy was an air raid warden along with Walter Reich. They lived right around the corner from each other. And then somebody was making this joke that these two guys with these heavy German accents are walking around Bel Air, you know, with the lights as the air raid wardens. I don't know whether that's true, but that's why. Because we weren't surrounded, like Mervyn LeRoy lived next door, so.
Hi, I was the woman sitting next to you in the theater, and he said, no relation to the greatest filmmaker in the world, right? The other day. But Ernst Lubitsch, your father, I think one of the things that I find so incredible about his work is his absolute awareness of gesture and the subtleties of gesture and movement and rhythm, and the way in which in films like Trouble in Paradise, the two lead characters move it's like a dance. They
Right,
move,
right.
across the room, back and forth in this kind of circles and waves and gestures. And when you said that your father liked to dance, and he was a good dancer, I thought, wow, of course, he must have been a great dancer. So I was wondering if you have any idea where that came from, because he began so early making films in 1914, and he was also briefly an actor.
Yes, no, he was an actor with Max Reinhardt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering just where that might have come from, if it's
Where the love of dance came from?
Yeah, his love of, or his attentiveness to gesture, and I think that also connects to some of the things that were raised about his sense of satire and awareness of how we are as human beings, how we act in the world, our bodies, how
Right.
the body.
I don't know where it came. First of all, his love of dance and his movement. I think if you have a dancing gene or a love of dance, it's in your person, and you see the world in that way and in movements. My mother was a wonderful dancer too. But yes, what you've said, I feel that all of his films are very choreographed. And it goes right back, it starts in the German films. I mean, look at The Oyster Princess. Yeah, I think everything was in his head and was, you know, he acted out all the parts for all the actors. And I heard that Jean Tierney drove her absolutely crazy. She really didn't like it, and other actors thought it was terrific, but he knew exactly what movement, exactly what he wanted from them and how everything should work. I don't think anything was left to happenstance, or what's the word I'm looking for? Left to chance, right, bingo. Yes, oh, absolutely. No, he played music on the set. He played the piano. I don't think he had other music, but I don't know. I could be totally wrong, but on the set there was always a piano and he was always playing it. But yes, I totally agree with you. I think everything, but I think also you're talking about satire, sometimes just talking to you, things come. I think when you're, and I'm going to sound as though I'm contradicting myself, but he was not a good-looking guy. And he never was going to be a leading man, which his acting teacher told him. You know, you're funny looking, you're this little guy. So he was carrying a spear in the back row for Max Reinhardt in The Miracle. He was the grave digger in Hamlet. I mean, he was never going to be Hamlet. So I think that gives you an outlook as the other, as the outsider, that maybe gives you a bit of a sarcastic or cynical spin. I was a very fat child, me. And it made me make fun of myself before people could make fun of me. So I was always finding ways to act out. I was always thrown off the school bus or out of the dining room because that was my persona, to be the clown. And I think, and my mother said, because I was very fat, that I had very long hair, so people would say, there's the little girl with the beautiful hair. They wouldn't say, there's the little fat girl. So I think that with my father, as I'm talking to you, I think that that maybe answers some of that, because he was not the good-looking Prince Charming. That maybe gives you a slightly cynical look at things, because you see them as an outsider. You're not the Cary Grant. You're not, you know what I mean? So I think perhaps that could be the edge.
Yeah, with the movement, I always assume that that's partly Reinhardt training too.
Yeah.
And his interest in gesture and why he worked so well with Paula Megrin, because of her training as a dancer and then going through Reinhardt as well. I mean,
Reinhardt, somebody asked what director he admired. He revered Reinhardt, revered him. And when Reinhardt left Germany and came to Hollywood, he lived with him for a long time before, because he had a hard time getting on his feet, Reinhardt.
Yeah, sorry, it's just an observation, really. It's the German-Hollywood connection. Your story of your rescue is extraordinary, incredibly moving, and would make a fine movie.
It would, wouldn't it? Now that we know more about it, it'd be fabulous, with the doors and everything, yeah.
I didn't know that story.
No, I didn't either.
I do know something about that ship that saved you. It was commissioned by Axel Wenner-Gren in the 1930s.
Right.
And he made his fortune inventing a vacuum cleaner in Berlin, and founded the Electrolux Corporation. It was the biggest ship in the world, a private home ship.
Oh, really?
And he commissioned it so that him and his wife, called Marguerite, and her sister, called Jean Gaultier, who was a writer and a scenarist for the Kalem Film Company, one of the very first female director, actor, she wasn't director, producer, and she retired from the movies in 1916.
Huh.
And they sailed around the world in the 30s in this incredible yacht. And she wrote a memoir on that boat.
Really?
On Silver Cross. And there was enormous controversy around that saving, because it was presumed, because Wenner-Gren then made a lot of money out of making armaments.
Right.
For Germany in particular, and for Italy.
Yes.
And it was assumed by the American press, in fact it was probably placed by the American government, that Wenner-Gren was in the area as a kind of a spy for Germany.
Oh, I
And
didn't know that.
The proximity of the ship to your ship was not a coincidence.
Oh.
And so Wenner-Gren was then blacklisted by America and seen as an enemy. And that this act, which he always presented as an act of humanitarian coincidence, was then painted by the Americans as actually an act of espionage.
Interesting.
And so disreputable did the ship become as a consequence. He sold it immediately after the war to Howard Hughes.
Thank you for that. He did come and visit my parents. I mean, he's in my guest book.
Wenner-Gren?
Yeah.
Yeah, he set up the Wenner-Gren Foundation in the United States, and he gave away many, many millions. He was also painted, and it's kind of disputed, but he was painted as an anti-Semite, a fervent anti-Semite. And in the diary I have, there's a great deal of anti-Semitism. This is in the late 1930s. So there's a kind of a mad connection there between Hollywood and Germany in that incredible moment.
Yeah. Thank you. It broadens the picture. Now we can write a script, right?
It's interesting to say about his directing actors, because Chaplin is always praised or accused because Chaplin really wanted to play all the parts. Do you think,
Understandably.
yes. Do you think your father had the same wish to play all the parts?
I don't.
And that's what these people were doing it for him.
Certainly not the women. I mean, he.
Oh yeah. Okay. No, no. Well.
No, I think that he just knew it better.
Yes.
I mean, and he knew. I mean, who would pick Jack Benny to do Hamlet? I mean,
yes.
he really picked the right people so often. I mean, and if Garbo had stayed with him, this is not answering your question at all, is it?
No, never mind.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm sure he was a frustrated actor, so this was a chance to. Oh, but listen, I just heard this. This is something for somebody to look for. Apparently, on the set, one of the cameramen started photographing Daddy, all his acting out the parts, and showed them to him. And he loved it, and they kept photographing him, and those takes have just vanished. Somewhere in this world, maybe, there are those outtakes of Daddy acting all the parts. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yes.
Yeah.
You didn't finish the sentence. If Garbo had stayed with him.
If Garbo had... Well, he told her not to do the next movie that she did, Two-Faced Woman. And if she had listened to him, he wanted to do, I'm told, he wanted to do a musical with her. Wouldn't that have been fun? Yeah. And if Mary Pickford had stayed with him, also.
Yeah, definitely.
I was wondering if you remember whether he mixed with the intellectual German.
Absolutely, yeah.
He did Thomas Mann.
Yes, I mean, in our, in Daddy's guest book, which had a short life, but yeah, it was Thomas Mann, a lot of musicians, Klemperer, Schoenberg not.
No.
Schoenberg not, but Thomas Mann definitely, Klemperer, Bruno Walter for sure. I mean, oh my God, as a child, my mother would take me to concerts at Carnegie Hall, and we would sit in Bruno Walter's box, and if that wasn't deadly, when you're a little girl, and Johnny Waxman and I would get thrown out into the anteroom to be quiet because we were so raucous and badly behaved. But yes, Bruno Walter, Hosea Turby, Rubinstein. There were a lot. Salvador Dali is in our guest book. So there were a lot. Definitely intellectual community. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, combining things with Florence.
Salka Viertel, that was another great friend of his. Salka Viertel.
Because I was just thinking when Heifetz and Florence Muto were married, I don't know if that was...
I don't know. Heifetz I know through Franz Waxman, because Franz Waxman really accompanied and did a lot of arrangements for Heifetz. And when my father died, he had this incredible piano, which I now have, that Franz Waxman kept for years until I got my own apartment when I was grown up.
I just remember that one of the highlights in the history of the Giornate was the presentation of one of your father's earliest films. I say it in English because my German is much too bad. It's
You don't-
Was Dead.
Als ich tot war.
Right.
Yes. And I had to read it now because I didn't remember, but since before you mentioned Anopataras, and so in my colleague Lorenzo Codere wrote a short note when we presented the film in 1995, and he remembers that the film was identified the final morning of the Giornate 1994 by our friends of the Ljubljana Film Museum together with Ennio Partalas the day of his birthday. So the film that we showed in 1995 was identified here at the year before at the Giornate. The film was found at the
Slovenia, yeah.
and it was identified here by Ennio Partalas.
Yeah.
The day that it was Ennio's birthday. So, and I think it's also, since Ennio left us earlier on this year, it's
I know.
a good way to remember him, and I think that the screening tomorrow will be devoted to him.
Yes.
Will it, to Enno?
Yeah.
I love him. He was very important in my life and very important, a wonderful man, and I was very sad. I just found out he died. So, I owe Enno a lot of discovering my father, and we became good friends. And I'm going, actually, we're going to Ljubljana from here. They took this fragment that they discovered, or the Als ich tot war made a play in Slovenia, and it played at the National Theatre for years and was a very unlikely, huge hit. And then, unfortunately, the actor died last year. So they stopped, the play is not given anymore, but they're going to show me a fragment of it that they photographed. So I'm very excited to go there. So my mother was trying to buy him a present and couldn't think of what to buy. She thought, cigars. I'll go and buy him cigars. And she's trying to describe my father, you know. She didn't say his name. She just said, I have a husband and he smokes all these cigars. And I guess when she got to 24, they thought, well, maybe we know who he is. So they said, well, madam, who are you buying? Who is your husband? And they said, she said, Ernst Lubitsch, and they said, madam, come with us. So it was like a Lubitsch film, like if I had $1 million, you know, come down the elevator, walk the long halls, and going past all of these doors, and finally he took a key, opened the door, and opened this huge humidor, this room, and he said, madam, these are Mr. Lubitsch's cigars. That had nothing to do with what you asked me. But anyway, that's a happier note to end on, I think. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.